Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Today we're going to be in Romans chapter 11. I'm not going to get there quite yet, but go ahead if you want to. You can go ahead and turn to join us there towards the end of the chapter. But as I think a lot of us struggle with God and how He is involved in our lives, because the God that we imagine, the God that we try to visualize in our heads is much smaller than the God of the Bible. We think that we have Him neatly defined and that we put Him in a box of our own making, and that if we do certain things and He does certain things, and that's the way it's all supposed to go. So when something doesn't happen that fits into that box, we get confused. But I think it's because we're trying to put Him in a box. And we think of Him as something that we can define. But if you think that God is too small because of something you're going through right now, and you think He can't fix it, or you think He won't, and you think that if you think He's too small, I think that you've got to look again. Over the centuries, Christians and theologians have used all kinds of words to describe God and his being. Words like sovereign, almighty, omnipotent, which means all powerful, omniscient, which means all knowing, omnipresent, which means he's always present, infinite, eternal, immortal. These are all words that have been used. That's not an exhaustive list, but there is no list of adjectives. Listen to me. There is no list of adjectives that can ever adequately picture the extraordinary immenseness of the God that we serve. He's so big that we don't have proper words to describe Him. He's bigger than our biggest words. He's grander than our grandest conceptions. And because He is God, no words or thoughts of mankind will ever be able to encompass His greatness. He's far bigger than we can imagine. His presence fills the universe. He's more powerful than we know. He's wiser than all the wisdom of this world combined. His love, absolutely beyond human understanding. His grace has no limits. His holiness, absolutely infinite. And His ways, so much higher than our own. He's the one true God. He has no beginning, and He has no end. He created all things, and all things exist by His divine power. He has no peers. Think about that. He has no peers. No one gives Him advice. No one can fully understand Him. He is perfect in all of His perfections. Our best efforts fall so far short of His divine reality that I think that we truly flatter ourselves to think that we can understand Him at all. Because you see, we are not God. There is a fundamental difference between God and His creation. His thoughts are higher than ours, precisely because He is God and we are not. Therefore, it should not surprise us that God does many things that we don't understand, or that most of our questions about this life will go unanswered. Job discovered this when God engaged him in a long series of questions. And it started with this question: where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? So with that background, I want us now to take a look at Romans chapter 11, verses 33 through 36. It says, "Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and the knowledge of God. How unsearchable His judgments and untraceable His ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord? Or who has been His counselor? Or who has ever first given to Him and has to be repaid? For from Him and through Him and to Him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. Of all the passages in the Bible that speak about God's greatness, and there are tons of them, perhaps none contains so much truth packed into 4 small verses. This passage is sometimes called the doxology of theology, or an explosion of praise. The words are reviving, they're hopeful, they're absolutely breathtaking. No preacher ever feels adequate when faced with a marvelous passage such as this. It contains depths of truth that none of us will be able to fully explore, much less understand here on this earth. But there are 3 things that I believe this passage tells us about God. The first is this: He knows everything there is to know. The first part of verse 33 says, "Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God." The Apostle Paul, in writing this new guide, as well probably as any man ever has, yet he confessed himself at a loss to know the depth of God's wisdom. So how deep is he? I think he's so deep that we can only stand at the edge and peer over, not ever being able to see the bottom. Paul felt this immense depth as he now comes to the end of the first part of Romans, where he speaks about God's sovereignty, he speaks about man's sin, he speaks about God's eternal plan. And then finally, it's kind of like Paul is saying, all right, let us stop reasoning. Let us stop thinking we have this all figured out and understood, and simply praise our God. I believe that theology the study of God must eventually become praise, or else we become guilty of thinking that we can understand him. When I think of astronomers that gaze at the stars, recently people went out to see what's called, the Christmas star. It's actually just the lineup of 2 planets, and it was so bright that some people were able to see it. And I think of the most powerful telescopes around the world. The largest is a telescope. It's got a big long name. It's often referred to as GTC. That's what it says. But it's almost 7,500 feet above sea level in the Canary Islands. It has been able to obtain an image of a galaxy that's 500 million light years away. Basically, that is 10 times deeper into space than we have ever been able to observe before. When I think of the people that are able to, the images that are captured on these telescopes, these massive telescopes, and these astronomers that study them and gaze at the stars in the sky. And these telescopes like this GTC in the Canary Islands that takes us to the edges of the universe. I believe that any wise man that sees those things would simply bow his head and say, "How great thou art." Robert Jastrow founded NASA's Goddard Institute. And in his book, God and the Astronomers, he comes to this conclusion. Listen closely. This is an exceedingly strange development, unexpected by all but the theologians. They have always accepted the word of the Bible. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. But for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, this story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak, and as he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. His point is that as we explore what we see as the infinite boundaries of the universe, And it makes us wonder where it all came from or how it all got here. That those scientists get to the end thinking they're about to conquer and find out the greatest truths of life. And when they get there, they find out that the people, the theologians that have been studying the Bible for centuries were already there. Because they already knew the answers. The Bible tells us the heavens declare the glory of God. These words remind me of that psalm in Psalm 19. It says the heavens declare the glory of God and the sky above proclaim his handiwork. That's what Robert Jastrow was saying here. Those who know most, that know the most about science, the most about religion, the most about theology, I believe must confess how little they actually know. Because God is deeper than our minds can fathom. Not only are his wisdom and knowledge deeper than we know, it's not just deeper than we know, it's deeper than we can imagine. We have no mental category for the depth of God and of his character. We simply know that it is. And we know nothing about it except what God chooses to reveal to us. We can't begin to comprehend the depths of his being. Our text suggests that he knows everything that could ever be known. Not only is his knowledge deep, it's also wide. He knows everything that has been, everything that is, and everything that will be. He knew what was going to happen last night. He knows what's going to happen tonight. He knows what's going to happen tomorrow. He knows everything that could have been, could be, or could ever be. And not only does he know it, but he's known it since the beginning of time. The second thing I believe that this passage tells us is that God makes plans that we can't understand. The second half of verse 33 says, how unsearchable his judgments and untraceable his ways. Not only does God make plans we don't know about, even if we did know about them, we couldn't understand them. That explains to me why some things in life remain unexplainable. It's not that God is unwilling to explain to us. God is not hiding from us. It's just that our finite little human minds can't begin to comprehend the infinite purposes of God. John Wesley said it this way: show me a worm that fully comprehends a man, and I'll show you a man that can comprehend God. Basically, it can't be done. The third thing this passage tells us is that God alone knows why everything happens. It says that his ways are untraceable. We can't follow a path and know what he's going to do. There's times where I believe we must stop trying to pry into the mysteries of God and just bow before him in adoration and praise for the things we don't understand. You can't tell where he's been or where he's going. He leaves no track. He leaves no trail. What that means is that in life, things will happen that we simply do not understand. Sickness, death, accidents, violent crimes, financial collapse, divorce, crumbled dreams, cancer, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, famines, war, broken promises, evil seeming to triumph over good, lost jobs, ruined lives, children dying. The list is endless. It's heartbreaking. And only God knows why these things happen. And most of the time we can only wonder. Verses 34 and 35 of our passage contain 3 rhetorical questions. That means questions that are not meant for you to answer. But each one expects a negative answer. And they all begin with the same 2 words. Who has? Who has? Who has? answer is always the same. No one. No one. No one. Who has known the mind of the Lord? No one. Who has been his counselor? No one. Who has ever first given to him and has to be repaid? No one. Lots of people seem to think they know what God is like. But the only thing that we truly know about him are the things that he has chosen to reveal to us. He guides everything in the universe. No one guides him. He counsels all of creation, but no one counsels him. The absolute, just the even thought that a mere man could counsel God could be compared to a candle trying to give its light to the sun. No one knows as much as God does. No one can explain him. No one can be his counselor. Let me be very clear on this point. God saves those he is under no obligation to save. He could have destroyed the human race and started over again with better raw material. But he didn't. What he did was quite literally unthinkable. The infinite God became finite to save us. And now in this passage, it's kind of like Paul he says these things and now he just can't contain himself any longer. He means to show that God is all in all. Everything comes from him. Everything exists by his power, and everything will ultimately answer to him. He says, for from him and through him and to him are all things. In this moment, Paul dethrones man and puts God on the throne of the universe. When I look at this phrase, that to him are all things, I believe this is a breathtaking statement because Paul says all things. Nothing is left out. There's no part of creation that is excluded. God is the beginning, middle, and end of all things. Everything comes from him, everything continues by him, and everything finds its ultimate purpose in him. He's the source of all things, which means that all things flow from him. Not only do all things flow from him, but he is the reason for the continued existence of the universe. He alone understands the purpose for everything that he has created. And there are going to be times where we may spend days or weeks or years in some of the darkest places of life. Sickness and heartache, tragedy, betrayal. And it may cause us to think that there are no lighter places. But you see, God is painting a masterpiece of your life. And before he's finished, he'll use every color on his palette. If you do not see the final product on earth, you will see it clearly in heaven. I believe that in dealing with our deepest struggles, it helps us to be reminded of who God really is. The greater the view of our God, the more strength we will have to face the trials of life. Similarly, the lower our view of God, the more likely we are to be blown away when tragedy strikes. God being bigger than we can understand is one of the most beautiful things about all of this. So what is left for us but the words of Paul in verse 36? To him be the glory forever. I believe that all of these mysteries of God lead us in one of two directions. Either you give up on your faith altogether and become a skeptic, or you bow in knee before a God that is too great, too vast, and too awesome for you to fully comprehend. God is so big that we can't understand him. But that's not a bad thing. Because life brings us so many things we can't understand. that we can't deal with. That in our humanity, we can't begin to comprehend them, much less survive them without him. Because a God that's that big sees what's going on. And he is not blown away by what happens. He's there, steady. Whatever comes, whether it be tragedy or triumph, in the midst of all of our lives and all the years that we live, the seasons will change almost infinite times, it seems. There will be times when we think we know enough, and times when we realize that we absolutely know nothing at all. And those times when you feel that all hope is gone, all we have left is God. A God that is so infinite and limitless and amazing, the source of all things, that he can handle everything that comes your way. So in those moments of tragedy, when you feel like the rug's been pulled out from underneath you, he is there to catch you, to hold you tight. When all of your hope is gone, all you have left is him. And in the words of Paul, to him alone be the glory forever.